Back in August, in response to AFN Chief Perry Bellegarde's call to rally the First Nations vote, a Mohawk named Steve Bonspiel penned an article entitled, "Why Mohawks Don't Vote in Federal Elections." And he joins us now from Montreal. And Sylvia Maracle from the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centres is also with us to debate the merits of putting an X on the ballot. And we welcome both of you to TVO tonight. Steve, I want to start with you. First, I want to read an excerpt from your piece, and then we'll chat after that. Here's an excerpt. Assembly of First Nations National Chief Perry Bellegarde is encouraging Aboriginals to get out and vote in the October 19th federal election, specifically in 51 of what he calls key ridings, where Indigenous peoples can supposedly make a difference with a simple X. Although his frustration with the Canadian government is certainly felt in all of our communities, his logic is flawed. Okay, Steve, let's start there. How is his logic flawed?
Well, I think that, he's saying that simply to participate and to vote is going to make a difference. And I think that my argument is that, first of all, it's a foreign system, so we should not be participating. But second of all, that if we merely partake in this election, it doesn't mean that we're going to get the results that we want. It doesn't mean that things are going to change in terms of how the government deals with us, which is very paternalistic. Doesn't mean that we're going to get more land back. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to get our point across and be equal partners at the table. They could split the vote NDP, Liberal, and then Harper still wins. So I think that simply looking at it simply like that, if we just vote, we will make the change, is flawed in itself.
Let me follow up on one word you just used now. You use the same word in your article. You say the vast majority of us will not vote for a foreign leader, period. Really? A Canadian leader is a foreign leader?
Well, I always try to explain to my Canadian friends that it's not a pejorative thing that we're not Canadian. when we say we're Mohawk First, that's fact. We are Mohawk First, and we're not Canadian. Whereas other Native people might say they are Cree First and Canadian Second. We were here long before Canada existed. It's not a thing where we're trying to start a fight. It just is. So I try to always get that across to say we have our own governance, our own traditions, language, culture. We were here long before Canada existed, and you have to look at it in those terms.
No, I take your point in all of that. Trust me, I take your point in all of that. But Indigenous Canadian, however you want to say it, Mohawks and Canadians have lived side by side for hundreds of years now. Do you still consider it to be a quote-unquote foreign relationship?
It is, because we have our own governance, and that's where the Two-Row Wampum Treaty comes in, where we have our own form of government, we have our own lives, we have our own thing going on, the canoe, so to speak, and the Europeans, which was originally the Dutch and then stretched out to all other Europeans, all other immigrants that came here, are on their ship, and that they should sail side by side together for eternity, not to interfere with one another.
Okay, Sylvia, let me get you into this. What have the Friendship Centres got planned as we head towards an October 19th election day?
Well, so I want to pick up on what Steve's talking about, and I think that is absolutely what the Two-Row Wampum set out 350 years ago. But we have to admit that in those 350 years, times have changed. And there's been a lot of interference in our affairs. And so a great number of us no longer live in our community. And our employment and the way that we move about doing things comes, how we get services in town or in villages. And in fact, in our home communities as well, there are all kinds of agreements. And so I think the nature for us in the Friendship Centres is making sure that people understand the system, that in the case of some of our young people and people generally, I mean, I think Canadians forget a fact that we didn't get a vote until 1960. So it's not that we're experts and practiced at it. And if somebody in your family doesn't really lead the way and teach you how to do that, as I've done with young people in my life, say, here's how you go in, here's what's going to happen, here's what you do, and talking about positions of people, then I think you don't know how to do it. So Friendship Centres are talking about those kinds of things, trying to engage young people that way.
Admittedly, we've had a 100-year head start on you in terms of voting at election time, but having said that, do you want people to vote? Do you want Indigenous Canadians to vote in this election?
I want them to be informed about the option and to participate as they wish. So I don't think for us it's a forced position, but lots of us do participate in voting, and we recognize that we can influence the outcomes.
Are you going to vote?
Things. I always vote.
You always
voted
vote.
Since I was 18 and I could do it the first time.
Gotcha. According to StatsCan, in 2006, the median age of the Aboriginal population was 27 years old, compared to 40 years old for the non-Aboriginal population. Sheldon, if you could bring up this chart, because this chart's going to indicate that that's an age with 45% participation in the last election. So is it possible that the low turnout rate of Indigenous Canadians has as much to do with their age as with their background?
I think that that's one factor, but I think there is this notion of separateness, that the historical relationships, I think that Steve has mentioned, some people consciously don't want to participate and pass that on and talk up the reasons for that. I think there's also a real lack of knowledge. In some communities, it's an issue of literacy and language. And so I think that age is a factor. I don't think it is the only factor.
Steve, have you ever voted?
No, I've never voted in federal or provincial elections. I think age might be a factor, but I think that what it comes down to, at least, especially in Ganassadage, Ganawag, and Aguzasne, from people that I've spoken to, is if we do participate in this system, what difference will it make? And I think we've seen that in the past, whether it's Liberal government or Conservative government, they continue to treat us the same way. It just so happens that this time around, Stephen Harper has passed many bills that, quote unquote, target our communities, including tobacco, the terrorism bill, which essentially has the very real possibility of targeting Native protesters. And all that combined, is why people are saying, okay, we got to stop Harper, and we're looking to the Aboriginal vote. But what about mainstream Canada? I mean, if you want to stop Harper, then it's up to the Canadians that are voting to get them out, to raise their participation rates. I mean, usually, traditionally, anyways, the participation rates in elections are pretty low in the mainstream. So,
okay, fair enough. But let me push back on one thing you said there, which is that. And I think you mentioned this in the article too, they're kind of all the same. I think if Paul Martin is listening to this program, he's going to be pretty upset at listening to that, because he put $5 billion into something called the Kelowna Accord, which then the Harper government canceled upon taking office. So, I mean, that's one example of where they're not all the same. So how can you say that?
Well, $5 billion is only a small start, let's say. There's a whole lot more that has to be done, and it's not only about money. It's about actual respect and treating people equally across the board and respecting inherent rights. Native people, Ungwe people, have inherent rights that existed for thousands of years. We had our own form of government. We have lost that because of racist policies, because of the way society has treated our people. The 60 scoop, residential schools, you could point to so many things that, Paul Martin came in and said, here's $5 billion for the Kelowna Accord, but that's for 633 Native communities across Canada. It's not a whole lot of money.
Sylvia, I want to quote from an article on the Aboriginal Vote by TVO Chantal Braganza. It's on our website at tvo.org if anybody wants to find it. Here's what she said back in August. Come election time, our communities become popular and politicians come to the reserve asking for votes, says Tyrone Souliere, a political organizer and resident of Garden River First Nation. Then the election happens, First Nation people split their vote 3 or 4 different ways, and then we're left with the status quo. Are Indigenous Canadians one-issue voters in your view? Absolutely not.
I mean, I agree with the list that Steve has raised in terms of concerns that I think, but there are other concerns. There are concerns with respect to education, with respect to health. Believe it or not, we actually, besides having an incredibly young population, we're beginning to have an aging population who's saying, where's healthcare going to be? There's certainly employment issues.
Do you think all the parties are the same?
No, I don't think all the parties are the same, but I think that for me, a perspective that Steve has offered is that, and your quote offers, is that it is a status quo. So let's be honest, there have been other governments in this country who promised us great numbers of things and in their time didn't change them, haven't changed them.
So you are taking all of the promises in this campaign with a big grain of salt.
With exactly. I mean, I think, you know, some of the issues with respect, for instance, to missing and murdered Indigenous women, and the fact that we're going to have two parties are saying, yes, we're going to have an inquiry, one's saying we're going to do it in 100 days. I'm not sure that we can pick the right commissioners in 100 days. I'm not sure that we can have a plan. And it's not going to do us any good in the long run if that's our issue, or we collectively think that that's an important issue. And we jump after that and find that there isn't a whole bunch behind it. So there are lots and lots of issues. I don't think that we're a single issue voter. And I think that we have some reason to be suspicious of a lot of people, and we're very popular right now. We absolutely are. We can get an all-candidates meeting in every friendship center if we want it. But years can go by while people are in office and they don't show up after that to have the conversation about what the mandate they were given was.
Steve, I want to follow up with you on something that I talked about with Chief Perry Bellegarde when he was here, and that is that initially he wasn't going to vote because he'd listened to the advice of his elders who suggested he ought not to. And then he had a change of heart, and he says he is going to vote, although he won't say who he's going to vote for. What do you make of that change of heart?
He had a change of heart. I think he might have realized that, you know, he's the head of the AFN and that they supposed to represent all Native people in Canada, which he doesn't, which AFN does not. You know, there's 633 Grand Chiefs that vote for the leader of the AFN. You know, I don't have a chance to vote for the leader of the AFN. So I think that's one thing. But I wanted to point something out. In 1969, the White Paper, which was Pierre Trudeau's doing, along with Jean Chrétien, who was Indian Affairs Minister at the time, was set up to assimilate our people into the mainstream population. 1969. That wasn't that long ago. We only got the right to vote in 1960. The right, I should say. Before that, you know, if you wanted to vote, you had to renounce your Native heritage, your Native citizenship, your identity as a Native person to become a Canadian. So that's the kind of playing field we've been dealing with for, you know, it hasn't been that long.
Well, in some respects, sorry, Steve, I'm going to push back on that. In some respects, obviously, in the vast scope of history, it hasn't been that long. But on the other hand, were you even alive in 1969?
I'm still feeling the effects of it, though. I didn't go to residential school either, but it's something called intergenerational trauma is lying squarely on my shoulders. Okay,
so your view that despite the fact you weren't around in 1969, you feel you are still feeling the effects of that White Paper from more than 45 years ago?
Because I think what it does, Steve, is it points to whether, like I said before, whether it's liberals, conservatives, the kind of the control that they want to have over our communities, you know, to assimilate, to commit genocide, to control all aspects, education, health, everything that we do. And these bills show that, you know, Bill C-51, so many different ones that are aimed at, you know, controlling. Look at the First Nations Education Act, you know, that was repealed. That was aimed at saying, well, we are going to tell you what's good for your kids and what you should teach them because you don't know, you know, how to do that. So I think we've been dealing with this. That was just last year. I mean, we've been dealing with this, you know, for 500 years, and it's not going to change. And I think we have to take more control over our communities, and as part in that way, not to take part. Sorry, I'm choking here. Take part in a foreign system.
Understood.
So I was alive though in 1969, and a teenager, young teenager, and did it influence me, and does it influence me? Yes. If you look at the development, for instance, of Aboriginal organizations and some of our own bodies, including, you know, the AFN and the organization I work for, you're going to find they were all created in the years, although a forerunner of the AFN in terms of the NIB, they all were developed around it. This was our answer back. And so there are people like myself who take voting seriously because we're suspicious of what the ramifications might be, and so you can look at it both ways, I think. But I did live with it through it. So.
Steve and Sylvia, we thank you both for your time, and we appreciate you having this debate tonight on TVO. Thanks so
for
much.
having us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.